Good evening and welcome to the special Pride edition of the Gay Liberation Network's live call-in show. And we will be talking this evening with a couple of our members, myself and Andy Thayer, on in Chicago, and the link there. We have some announcements to be making in this special Pride to be directly related to the Rahm Emanuel mayoral administration, which has been particularly covering up police murder in this city. In addition, the priorities of this administration are entirely out of whack with where the city needs to be, and we'll be going through some specific research and things that have been done to show what we need to be supporting in our communities. And you can see on your screen there poor funding of our schools, closing of our schools, as well as shutting down mental health clinics as some of the examples of poor priorities that we've had. Our contingent in the Pride Parade in previous years is passing by on your screen. You can see it's a fun time, and we invite you to come out with us on the last Sunday in June, Sunday, June 26th, at 11 a.m. Be up at the Uptown Target, which is close to the Wilson Red Line stop, for the afternoon in the Pride Parade there. Oh, go ahead.
There's also going to be a protest demanding an elected police accountability council Wednesday, June 22nd, starting at 8:30 a.m. at City Hall, 121 North LaSalle Street. If you're upset, put it mildly, about the way that this mayor has covered for police murder, how he's given us fake reforms while not doing anything to actually discipline police, then you should participate in this protest. Again, coming up 8:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. Wednesday, June 22nd, demanding an elected police accountability council, something that other cities have got, but we here in Chicago, not believing in democracy, we don't have. So check that out. We'll have these announcements up later in the program as well.
Thanks, Andy. Mm-hmm. So our topic, it's great that it's Pride Month and we can focus on the history of Pride. So it's a great connection that we have with our history as gay people fighting for our rights, and the Pride marches that we all participate in, and that is a million plus attended spectator event here in Chicago. As we all know, Chicago has been rocked over the last year by the videos of police abuse of power and killing civilians. The Laquan McDonald shooting, which had 16 shots. Let's go through them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 shots and a cover-up. 16 shots and a cover-up. This is directly at intersections with our history as LGBT people and the Stonewall riots that started our Pride parades as being, that was a police riot in 1969 in New York.
Well, and people responded by rioting themselves. I mean, it's important to understand that our movement started as a movement against police brutality, as you see in this historic picture here, just one of many pictures from the Stonewall Rebellion of 1969. So LGBT people in this country and countries around the world have historically had a huge problem with police. Obviously, black people have had a huge, huge problem here in this town, and the fact that all the police officers who have who witnessed and wrote false reports about, they committed felonies by covering up for the Laquan McDonald murder. That really, to me, is the most disturbing aspect of this, because you're going to have the occasional psychopath, such as a John Birch, who may be drawn to the profession of being a police officer because he gets to bully people, he gets to beat up people, and so forth. The real problem, though, is not the occasional psychopath, in my view. It's the so-called good cops. And there were literally dozens of cops who covered for John Birch. There were dozens of cops who covered for the police killing 16 shots of Laquan McDonald. The so-called good cops are the real problem here. And I'm very fearful that our city is going to repeat the sordid history of John Burge, where only after many years did the police department finally cut loose John Burge, and it happened without coincidence during the Rodney King rebellion in LA that the city finally fired him. But what's going to happen to all these cops around that covered for the police murder of Laquan McDonald? If it follows what happened with John Burge, they'll be promoted. They'll get raises.
We have a caller. Caller, go ahead.
Good evening. Andy, I want to ask you something. My name is Joe.
Hi, Joe.
My question is, I've been listening on the news when they're talking about they're going to revamp this new independent police board.
Yes.
Now, how independent can it be if the police superintendent has some input in it, plus the fact when we get this so-called new independent police review board, are they going to get their budget from the Chicago Police Department?
You made a
I'm
very...
just curious. I'm just, like I said, I'm just a blind country boy, and if I can see
Not too
certain
blind
things
from what I can
going
see.
on, huh?
Not too blind from what I can see.
I just ask you, and first of all, independent, that means the superintendent don't have no input in it. He going to have input on who's going to be hitting it up, and plus the fact they're going to still be getting their budget from the Chicago Police Department. So they're still not independent. It sounds, you ever heard of the three-card Molly? That's what it sounds like it being played to me. They're hiding the cards.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head there, Joe, that what we've got is we've got an administration that governs by press release. And every time it has some public relations trouble, then it issues a press release. Whether it's about homelessness, it says, oh, we're going to take care of the homeless under Lakeshore Drive. And then you find out they haven't even lined up any funding for it, and this in a city that's practically bankrupt. The same thing with the so-called abolishment of IPRA, the Independent Police Review Authority. Again, they issue these press releases, they have nice marketing, and the Tribune, the Sun-Times, most of the time fall for it. And then you look at the details, and Rahm Emanuel is not calling for an elected police accountability council. IPRA itself was a replacement for the Office of Professional Standards, affectionately known back in the day as OOPS, because it did pretty much what IPRA does, which is to cover for police murder. And as we saw with IPRA, we have the same old people recycled. The task force that the city set up was set up under the aegis of none other than Lori Lightfoot, who's got a notorious history with IPRA and with the police board for basically being the mayor's front man, both under Daley and under Rahm Emanuel, and covering for police murder and frankly trading on her identity politics. She identifies as a black lesbian. And the fact of the matter is that there's people in the LGBT community who are on our side, and there's people who are not. Just because you have the same sexual orientation as someone, or the same race, or the same gender, or whatever, doesn't mean that you're on your side. But they are very adept at playing these kind of PR battles. And so we've got black aldermen, we've got LGBT aldermen, who are some of the most notorious lickspittles for the mayor. Okay? And we have to identify with people by what they do and not what their identity is. And the fact is that Lori Lightfoot, who's been right at the center of the so-called reforms, is a very notorious character with a long track record in city politics.
Joe, I encourage you to go out to the hearing on the 22nd and get active with the CPAC initiative and try to get your concepts put in there. We will too. We have another caller. Please, caller, go ahead. What's your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the case of Lieutenant Glenn Davis. IPRA finally got something right. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. The Independent Police Review Authority recommended that Lieutenant Glenn Davis, the guy who stuck a gun in the mouth of a suspect, and who has a string of complaints from members of the community, it was recommended by IPRA that he be fired.
That's right.
But the police superintendent, the so-called reform-minded police superintendent, disavowed that recommendation and said that a 30-day suspension for Davis was enough. So I hope nobody's being taken in by the words of reform that are mouthed by Superintendent Eddie Johnson.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Right, and this is one of the reasons why our parade contingent is focused on getting Rahm to resign, because having full top down change is what is needed in the city of Chicago in order to make life better. Because these things we know have been going on for decades. They continue to be getting even worse, and it starts at the very top. It was with Daley 1, Daley 2. It's continued throughout, and so thank you very much, caller, for bringing some specific examples to our cause here. Andy's done a lot of research on actually, let me back up. Rahm's first campaign to be mayor of the city of Chicago, the linchpin of it was, ironically, to increase cops. I believe the number was 2,000 cops he wanted to get on the street, and that got lots of press. And according to the media, it sounded like that was a distinguishing characteristic of his campaign. And so Andy's done some research about how does Chicago really play out in the police to citizenry ratio, and what are some of the causes and effects of the relationship that we have right now. So I'll let you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, before we get into that, Brent, I just think it's going back to what the last caller said in terms of Eddie Johnson. This is a man who said that despite his decades, literally decades on the force, has never witnessed police misconduct, which must make him at least the most myopic person in this city. In which case, he shouldn't qualify as being a detective, let alone a superintendent, or he covers for it himself. And so you just look at where we're going with these so-called reforms. But getting back to what you're talking about in terms of the way that we're going to deal with the admittedly horrific violence rates in this city, much of which are police violence rates, I should say. We live in a city that, according to the FBI in 2012, had the third highest cop per capita ratio of any city in America. The third highest of any city over 10,000 people in population. Now, the FBI counted all police officers, municipal, state, federal, county. So if you actually just talk about municipal cops, probably Chicago is the number one. We have got probably the highest ratio of cops per civilians of any city in the country, of over 10,000 people. Number one was Washington, D.C., which has got a lot of federal presence. Baltimore, same thing as well. And so, arguably, if you just talk municipal cops, we've got the highest cop per capita ratio. And it should be noted, unfortunately, Chuy Garcia, to his eternal shame, was echoing these calls for more cops during the re-election campaign for Rahm Emanuel, as was Bob Fioretti, as was Karen Lewis when she was a presumptive candidate. So this is a problem with our politics right across the board, not just the evildoers such as Rahm Emanuel. This whole notion that we're going to deal with police violence or civilian on civilian violence by hiring more cops, the evidence isn't there. In fact, the evidence shows that spending money on cops takes away from money that actually can do things to stop brutality. And with your permission, Brent, I'd like to put up a graphic which I think shows this quite amply.
Well, and just I want to make the point too that Asada's daughters and the Black Lives Matter protests that have been going on about the police force are really about. Many of their points are about just changing the priorities. Why are we
Funding
closing
communities.
schools in order to pay for cops?
The biggest mental health clinic in the city by far is the Cook County Jail. We live in a city that under Rahm shut half of its mental health clinics. And it's indicative of what's been happening to working people, not just under Rahm Emanuel, but literally for the last few decades. You see this graphic up here. You look at the gray areas here. This is, see if I can get this going here. You see where the blue arrows are there. That's basically middle income folks as of 1970, okay? And most of the city was gray. Most people were middle income. And then you've got extreme poverty, the red there, okay? That's what the situation was in 1970. You can see Cabrini Green, you see near West Side there, you see between Hyde Park and the Loop. And then you had the uber-rich areas where the green arrows are there, okay? You fast forward to 2012 on the right there, and the areas of middle-income folks have been virtually erased from the city. They're still there, but wow, they've shrunk enormously. And in their place, huge areas, predominantly black and Latino communities, are incredibly impoverished.
Well below the median
Well
income.
below the median income. And not, obviously almost all on the south and north, on the south and west sides, but also you see up and around Hyde Park, in Rogers Park there in the north. It's not exclusively a south and west side, but it's huge. And then, of course, you've got the situation with the green areas here, showing with the green arrows here. That's the very rich taking over the lakefront on the north side, still up on the far north and the far southwest side. So this is what's happened to our city. Black Lives Matter activists have very aptly pointed out it's the defunding of our communities, it's the closing down of mental health clinics, it's the fact that, according to an article in the Tribune just a few days ago, the ratio, the differential between black youth and white youth unemployment is amongst the worst in the entire nation, right here in Chicago. So you wonder why we've got a violence problem amongst black youth. There's no jobs. The schools are being defunded. The mental health clinics are being shut down. There's no...
The neighborhoods that
neighborhoods
the
are
majority
being
of people
destroyed.
live in are well under the median income level.
And it's not because there isn't money there, because it's being shoveled through these TIF programs to luxury high-rises in the Loop, a luxury high-rise in Uptown. The money
Funds
is there.
to redevelop the Board of Trade.
Right, exactly.
An arena for DePaul University, a university that does, as a private university and won't have its funding cut this year like the rest of the state colleges that are around the city in the area.
Yeah.
So the issue is priorities, and we have a caller, and we'd like the caller to share with their thoughts.
Go ahead, caller.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. I wanted to point out that I certainly do understand with regard to the usefulness of the graphs. However, let's keep in mind that beginning in 1970 and moving forward, in 1979, the average household income saw its height in America in 1979. Beginning in the 1950s, we saw white flight from all major cities, not just Chicago. So that graph is interesting, but it by no means is limited to Chicago. The same thing was going on in New York, in Los Angeles, Boston, Washington, and so many other cities, certainly Detroit. It was a function of a great many things, but not the least of which was the notion that simply those people who could leave left cities all over the country to move to suburbia. Now, it's beginning in the 1990s, you saw another generation of young people who began to come back to cities. Crime began to come down. Right now, crime is at about a 45-year low across this country. So you see a lot of people, young people who want to live in major metropolitan areas. They're coming back. They're well educated, so they can afford to buy. And though it certainly there's an imbalance there, there is a sort of a natural cycle here. And Chicago still has almost twice the national level of poverty. as compared to what we should have relative to the rest of the country. So in many ways, Chicagoans at the top of the socioeconomic scale are subsidizing the poor in Chicago because, again, Chicago is disproportionately, I don't want to say burdened, but we do have a disproportionate number of poor people as compared to the suburbs that have a disproportionately low number of people. Now, I think it is incumbent upon us to discuss why it is that suburbia does not pay its fair share. It is a sort of leech on the city of Chicago and does not want public housing, does not want Section 8 housing, and yet wants to utilize all the facilities that Chicago has to offer. And I think that that's a discussion that we need to have, not just about Chicago, but about the region.
Yeah, well, sorry about that. Yeah, I think there is obviously a problem where communities such as Evanston and Oak Park get the benefits of the city, or people coming in on the commuter trains. But I think the main issue is there have been a lot of things done by our own mayor and his predecessor that has really exacerbated these issues. And when you're spending money on luxury developments rather than education, I mean, we just keep on having TIF fund after TIF fund, which is supposedly, our property tax is supposed to be going to the schools, and yet we get these huge subsidies for the rich. Just because we have a lot of poor people doesn't mean that we're really subsidizing them. If you look at the population living under Lakeshore Drive, under the viaducts and so forth, we're clearly not subsidizing people enough if that's where they have to live.
Right, and this is a priority conversation that's been going on for decades. I mean, with HIV crisis, as well as with the wars that we've had the last few years, regularly our chants at events are money for healthcare and education, not for war and occupation, not for police force aggrandizement.
Well, and the fact that we do spend as much on the military as the rest of the world combined, in that respect, I would agree with the caller that this is a nationwide phenomenon. But in Chicago, we've just managed to make things that much worse.
Right.
But we
need money for healthcare and education.
Well, and is one of the caller talked about the violence rates. One of the things, according to Mother Jones' article, is the lead poisoning, and of course that's now in the news again with all these schools that we've got. Lead poisoning is a huge precipitator of basic people acting out, especially in their youth, and that's why we had a huge problem, especially in the 1970s and 80s, with a spike in violence, with the increase in lead poisoning that was happening during that era. And now we find, even after the experience of Flint, that we've got our schools here in the city, a whole number of them, I believe it's about a fifth of them so far that have been tested, that are showing hugely elevated levels of lead. Right. But I think we need to be wrapping up here.
So I believe the first thing that you're going to see on your screen is this CPAC action to get a public review board for the police, and Joe, one of our callers, spoke to this point poignantly about how the things that we need to make sure are in that ordinance to make sure that it does become a truly independent from the police force entity. Go ahead.
Well, and we've got bringing on a lot of the issues that we just talked about, the issues of police brutality. We've got a mayor who's covered up police murder. He's been giving our tax monies to the rich while defunding the schools by the CHA literally sitting on $450,000, and yet it's allowing its own units to be flipped for yuppie housing. We're shutting the mental health clinics. We're harassing the homeless. We're defunding our communities. This is basically gross mismanagement of our city finances. And right at the center of it all is Mayor Emanuel and his buddies. And so in this year's Pride Parade, we're going to be having a contingent, a resign Rahm contingent, demanding that Rahm resign. And we invite you to participate in that contingent. Meet us at 11 a.m. on Sunday, June 26th, in front of the Uptown Target. That's just one block south of the Red Line, and you can get involved in that. And then finally, just a few thanks for the people who helped out in tonight's show.